My guest is Stephen Skultety, who is the professor of philosophy, chair of philosophy and religion at the University of Mississippi, also director of the Declaration of Independence Center for the Study of American Freedom. Good morning, sir. Welcome back. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to see you again. Thanks for having me.
So many things that are moving. First of all, give me a little status report of what's going on at the center.
Yeah, well, this last semester, we offered our first Freedom Studies classes, our Freedom Studies 101, Ideals of the American Founding, a class in Freedom and Economics, and then a class on Liberty Through Rights. And then we had our first cohort of Freedom Studies scholars. So we've got our first batch of students receiving scholarships. And then we've also started our lecture series, and we're uploading all of those to our YouTube channel now, so the public can view them as well.
Yeah, I don't want to glaze over this one too much, Stephen, because I don't think people understand exactly the need for this. But this center addresses a tremendous need that we have students who graduate from college with a lot of degrees, and even in traditional households, they don't understand the bonding. They don't understand the gift we have, the gift that many before us have died for, of freedom. We take it for granted, and this is one of the things that you guys kind of address in there.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think most Mississippians, I think most Americans want to live in a country where there's liberty and justice for all. And, in higher education, there's a lot of emphasis on justice, and just we don't take the time to have our students thinking deeply and clearly about the nature of liberty and freedom. And you're absolutely right. It's one of those things you really can't take for granted. It really deserves careful contemplation and study.
But isn't it really kind of a natural instinct? It follows the family, and what I'm talking about as far as evolution is concerned. When my grandparents left Italy on both sides of the mom, paternal and maternal, they wanted a better life for their children, my parents, and my parents wanted a better life for us.
Right.
But all those times, and we still do that today. Every generation has the same thing. I want you to enjoy what you have. You've got a new bicycle. Maybe it wasn't the one you wanted, but you got it. Our parents didn't have that. Our great-grandparents had even less, and et cetera, et cetera. And aren't we doing that as the United States of America? We're taking for granted. We're not appreciative of the things that we have.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the reason that happens is ultimately because of first principles and philosophy. I think a lot of people have a philosophy that says if you haven't chosen something for yourself, then it's not meaningful. And, there's a different kind of way of looking at the human condition where we can say, no, you didn't choose to be born in this country, but that doesn't mean you don't owe something to it. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't have meaning for who you are and how you should think of your obligations and responsibilities. And, that idea that patriotism and connection to a place can be something that you didn't choose, it runs afoul of, different kinds of philosophies that are very popular in other ways of looking at the world.
Do you see a change from the beginning of class to the end of it? The light turns on in some of the students?
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing we're trying to do at the Declaration Center is to really offer students an alternative vision to one that they've been exposed to for all of their years of education and most of their college education. So there's no magic silver bullet. There's no kind of one immediate moment where there's an aha. It's really just slowly working through these issues so that students see just how many interesting and profound issues are at stake here, and to show them that this is something worth their long-term attention. And that's what it's going to take, because these alternative ways of looking at the world, they've been around for a very long time, and we're part of a very large battle that'll have to be fought for a very long time. So we got to be in this for the long haul.
Yeah, and you cannot dismiss history, world history, and that we are aging as far as our democracy, which I understand the republic form, but the government we have is, number one, most unusual in terms of world history with the freedoms that we have. And the age that we're getting on it is getting pretty close to where most of them end.
Yeah, it's, there are these views, like Plato, for example, in Plato's Republic in Book 8. I mean, he has this line where he says all civilizations, all cities, they're like a plant. Early on, they bloom, they grow up, they flourish, and then there's a time when they pass away. Now, some people do have that kind of tragic view of the lifespan of countries. I don't believe in that. Yeah. I actually disagree with that. And I think, by exercising agency and thinking in the long-term interests of the country, you can kind of avoid decline. But just to go back to an earlier point you made, it's not something that'll just happen magically. It's not something that just happens by a pendulum swinging back. I mean, people have to stand up, exercise agency, get involved, and try to right the ship.
How does it, being also a professor of philosophy, how does that work out with the influx of literally 8 to 10, some people say 15, and Donald Trump even says at the end of this administration, in the 4 years of Joe Biden, it could be up to 20 million. How does that play in? Even if you put politics aside, it has to have some bearing on how the country moves forward, politically, socially, and every other way, spiritually, etc. You cannot put that many people in here from across the world and not have a tremendous nation-changing effects in more than one way.
Paul, I completely agree with that, but and notice though that there's a big philosophical debate behind the point you just made, which is, what is a country? What is a nation? And on the one hand, you have some people who think that a nation is just an idea. It's just an abstraction. And if you think that, well, then it really doesn't matter which particular people are here or not. It's just an abstract idea, and the facts on the ground don't matter as much. But that's just one philosophical view. But there's a different way of thinking about this that says a nation is made of people who have certain habits, who have a certain way of looking at the world, who spend their lives in a certain way and have certain kind of cultural expectations that allow them to form a genuine community. And those are two very profoundly different ways of looking at the human condition and understanding what it means to live in a community. And so this ultimately is partly a philosophical battle that we're involved in.
That's about as convoluted in my mind as saying that a family is an inconsequential gathering of people under one roof.
It's just an agreement. Yeah.
Just, you happen to be there and anybody could walk into anybody else's house, and then that's called a family.
That's a view that's out there. I mean, that's not... This first semester, we had 26 different students sign up, and then, like I said, an additional 8 students who are our Freedom Studies scholars. And we're hoping next semester, now that I've hired a team of people to help me, that we're really going to start advertising these opportunities and ramping this up.
And the degree you graduate with?
So we offer a minor in Freedom Studies. So that will actually appear on your transcript, and that minor can help fulfill your general education, or I'm sorry, your general requirements for graduating from the university. We had
a news flash yesterday that Google, it was finally ascertained that Google had actually interfered with major elections in the United States 41 times over the last 16 years, according to a new study from the Media Research Center. MRC researchers have found 41 times where Google interfered in elections over the last 16 years, and its impact has surged dramatically, making it ever more harmful to democracy. A lot of people are interfering one way or the other. Does the younger generation worry about the sanctity of the election process itself? Because in one case where liberalism kind of says, let's make it easier, let's extend the deadline, let's go out and do this and that, it does erode in the sanctity of or the security of the election process.
Yes, I do think students are worried about that. And, another point that I tried to make to them, and I'll direct them to go read the Twitter files. Everyone should go and read the work by Matt Taibbi and others who really exposed a lot of what was going on. The deeper thing about the political philosophy going on is that, the fact that elite people like that are taking it upon themselves to sort of steer elections or kind of steer narratives in one way or another, it just is clear that those people think of themselves as sort of in a different caste above the rest of the population, whose opinion can just be pushed this way or that way and who really don't matter. So the thing I worry about is not just tampering in elections, which is of course bad, but it's the view that some people have that there's an elite that just doesn't have to be responsive or accountable to the vast majority of citizens whose voice should also be heard, and that's a problem.
Well, accounting for doing some things that they should not be is front and center, and has been ever since not the indictment, but the readout from the FBI director on all of the rules and regulations and laws broken by Hillary Clinton, and then exonerated her, and then basically doing the same thing as far as Joe Biden's concerned, as far as those papers are concerned. I never. How do you stand up before your students and explain this when one of them says, why wasn't Joe Biden convicted one way or the other, or reprimanded, or anything at all, when at the first of all of this, a vice president is not allowed to have in his possession or her possession classified documents?
Well, I never want my students to think of me as like just getting into the specific politics like that. But the thing I emphasize is I want them to think about the broader principle that would allow that kind of thing in general. And I think this is just one more example of a broader problem, which is that we don't have a culture of accountability, especially I think at the national politics, where major decisions are made by individual people, and then no one is held accountable if something goes wrong, or a terrible decision was made, or a law was broken. We just sort of look the other way, or the laws are applied selectively in a way that seems, partisan and not worthy of a Republican government. So I think the specific issues are always troubling, but the broader implications for what it means for our political community, I think, are just as concerning. And I want students to really appreciate the weight of that.
When we talk about the end or the demise of democracy or our Constitution, et cetera, I always think that the difference in this country's freedom is we have a freedom that nobody's ever had before in this country, in the world. It's different. It's based on a lot of different things here, that we have inalienable rights, number one, given to us by God Almighty, not the government. And also that if it ever gets to the point where it nears collapse, we've never seen those freedom fighters. We've never been called to the point of, are we going to fight for this when everybody realizes it's about to go under? I guess if there are troops in the streets, it's different with the amount of weapons we have here, with everybody waking up and saying, oh, okay, we know what we're losing now, so let's go fight for it. And that's going to be a different thing in the country that anybody in the world has ever seen.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping we're far away from that.
Well, I'm not too sure.
But
I'm not too sure.
I emphasize this to people all the time, that to prevent that kind of disaster and kind of large-scale conflict, we've got to start fighting in the little battles. You've got to try and stand up and get involved, make a difference. Try and work with people who disagree with you. Try to convince them of your point of view. And if they won't listen, try again. And just keep at it and keep, engaging in these discussions so that we can avoid.
You are an optimist, sir. You are an optimist.
I'm a happy warrior, Paul. That's the way I like to think about it.
Well, when you put 8 million, 15 million, maybe 20 million people in and give them the right to vote immediately in this country, it does water things down. We see that in places like Minnesota. We see that in places like in Michigan, where immigrants' governings and their laws seem to take on more importance than the laws of this country. Well, who was it that said? Was it Benjamin Franklin that says, answering the lady saying, "We have freedom"? And he basically said, "Yes, if you can keep it."
Right.
Was that Franklin?
What kind of government have you created? He goes, "A republic, right, if you can keep it."
Yeah. Can we keep it without part of that fabric being faith? Without faith, will this last?
I mean, I think it requires faith. It also requires study. It requires being intelligent about what the goal is. Freedom sounds like an easy thing to understand, but there's so many different components that go into it. I think of it as sort of three different things. I mean, one, freedom is just not being interfered with, being able to do what you want. But freedom also means living in a community of rule of law, where you're not walking around worried that suddenly all the rules of the game will be different in ways you didn't understand. But third, freedom means being a certain kind of person who has self-control, who's temperate, who's not beholden to their desires or appetites in a way where they can't control themselves. And you need all three of those things. You need to be a certain kind of person living in a certain kind of community that's not constraining you. And if any three of those disappear, you won't have the other two as well. So it's a complicated thing. And if we don't understand that broad picture, I don't even think we'll be fighting for the right end. So it's really important to think clearly about that ultimate goal.
All right. But you don't see from where you are and your perch that we're losing all of those things you just mentioned, from the snatch and grabs, from the illegal border, from all of these things collapsing on us at a rate that we've never seen, not only in our lifetime, in anybody's lifetime in this country.
I worry about it all the time, Paul. I do worry, and we've got to we've got to be active, and we got to take these threats seriously, and just wake up every day and be ready to fight for our vision.
On that point, we both agree, sir. It's always a pleasure. I thank you for joining us.
Great.